Many religions today are designed to be a part of the world. Many participate in different celebrations or holidays that are popular in the world. Many governments will even decide what religion its citizens can or can't follow. And some people like it this way, others don't. But what about us? What should our relationship be with the world? As our topic suggests, that's what we'll be talking about this morning. Please turn with me now to John chapter 17, verse 16, where here we'll see how the Son of God, Jesus Christ, clearly explains what kind of relationship we should have with the world. Again, John 17, 16. They are no part of the world, just as I am no part of the world. Jesus makes it clear. We must be no part of the world. Why? Before we answer that, we need to know what the world in verse 16 is actually referring to. Here, the world is not referring to all of humanity or just the physical earth. In this context, the world is referring to all organized human society that exists outside the Christian congregation. That's what we're talking about when we say the world. So now, back to our original question. Why do we need to be no part of the world? The Bible tells us why. Turn with me now to 1 John chapter 5, and we'll look at verse 19. Again, 1 John 5, 19. We know that we originate with God, but the whole world is lying in the power of the wicked one. Yes, the whole world, or all organized human society, is lying in the power of the wicked one. The Bible identifies the wicked one as saying the devil. He is very real, and he is very much in control of the world. All of the religious, political, and economic systems of this world are under his control. So as Christians, we don't want to have anything to do with Satan's world. And there are many reasons why, but we'll just look at two. Because Satan is in control of the world, he can use the spirit of the world to make people reflect his traits. Why can we say that? Well, first, we need to know what is the spirit of the world. This is the force that influences human society to do things according to a pattern. In other words, the spirit of the world is what influences the way people act. And because Satan is in control of the world, he can influence people to act in a way that reflects his traits. What evidence do we have of this? Well, think about some of the major problems facing mankind, like war, crime, poverty. Problems that are a result of selfishness, dishonesty, cruelty. Traits that do not originate with God, but are traits that the devil does possess. This is one reason why we don't want to be a part of the world. Another reason is Satan also uses the spirit of the world to make people rebel against Jehovah's standards. In the Bible, Jehovah's standards are clear as to what is right or wrong. In the Bible, Jehovah has shown us the best way to live because his standards cover all aspects of life. What each person's responsibility in the family is, how we can conquer negative traits or habits, what's the best way to worship God. Because Jehovah is our Heavenly Father, he has every right to set these standards. And although some may think that Jehovah's standards are restrictive, those of us that choose to follow them benefit because we're able to avoid so many problems in our lives. But because Satan is in control of the world, he can influence people to live in a way that goes against Jehovah's standards. This is another reason why we want to be no part of the world. So now that we know why we have to do it. The question is, how can we do it? Well, Jesus knew that it would not be easy for us imperfect humans to remain a part of the world. That's why he gave us the perfect example to follow. So now we're going to look at 3 things that Jesus did, which allowed him to remain a part of the world. And this will help us to see how it's possible and practical for us to imitate his example. Turn with me now to John chapter 6, verse 15. Here, we're going to see how the first thing that Jesus did was he refused involvement in politics. Again, John 6:15. Then Jesus, knowing that they were about to come and seize him to make him king, withdrew again to the mountain all alone. In order for us to understand this scripture, we need to know the background or context behind this scene. During this point in history, Israel was under Roman rule, and this caused a number of problems for everyday people. So try to put yourself in their shoes. You're just an everyday man or woman going about your business when, almost out of nowhere, you see this man perform a miracle. Early on in the chapter, Jesus had just fed thousands of people, men, women, children. Not only that, but he did it in an organized way. After seeing Jesus perform this miracle, it was only natural that some people wanted to make him a king, but he refused. Why? Why did Jesus not get involved in politics? The Bible tells us why. In John 18:36, when Jesus was being questioned by the Roman governor, he said, "My kingdom is no part of this world." Jesus was not sent to the earth to become a human king. When he was on the earth, he preached about God's kingdom, the benefits that that government would bring to mankind. If he became a human king, his loyalty to God would have been divided. If he held this political position, how could he hold this political position and at the same time preach and teach about God's kingdom? It just wouldn't work. So what about us? What do we need to do? Well, just like Jesus, we have to remain neutral in politics. We don't pick sides. We don't get involved in conflicts. We don't get involved in media campaigns supporting one candidate or bashing another. As Christians, we are subjects of God's kingdom. That's the only government that we want to give our full support. So the political climate of our area or location really does not matter, because at the end of the day, God's kingdom will be the only power that rules mankind. And we want that to happen, because when we look around and see all of the problems in the world, a world that Satan controls, it's clear why we need God's kingdom. So we don't get involved in the politics of this world. But we have to admit, it's not easy to do that. A lot of people right now are talking about politics. How do we respond when the subject is brought up to us? Can we confidently explain our Bible-based position? If not, doing some research or personal study in the Bible can help. Because doing this is one way that we can imitate Jesus and remain no part of the world. Turn with me now to Matthew chapter 8, verse 20. Here, we'll see how the second thing that Jesus did was he shunned materialism. Again, Matthew 8:20. But Jesus said to him, "Foxes have dens, and birds of heaven have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay down his head." When Jesus was speaking here, he was expressing the fact about how during his ministry, he did not have a permanent home that he could call his own, which many other people during that time did have. But why did he say that? He was the Son of Man, a perfect human being. He could have pursued any career that he may have wanted. One of the titles that Jesus held was the carpenter. Can you imagine the homes that could have been designed by Jesus? The furniture designed by him. How comfortable would it have been? How much money could he have made for himself? How well could he have taken care of his family? Why didn't Jesus do any of these things? When Jesus was on the earth, he had an assignment, and that assignment involved him preaching and teaching about God's kingdom. In order for him to accomplish that assignment, he had to make sacrifices. So when Jesus is speaking here, he's helping us to appreciate that if we're going to follow him, if we're going to imitate him, we're going to have to make sacrifices as well. One way that we do that is by seeking God's kingdom first. We can seek God's kingdom first by preaching and teaching about it, which is exactly what Jesus did. Right now, millions of true Christians around the world are focused on preaching and teaching about God's kingdom, whether it be a door-to-door ministry, personal home visits, letter writing, telephone menacing, and the list goes on and on. No matter our circumstance, it is possible and practical for us to seek God's kingdom first. Doing this is another way that we can imitate Jesus and remain no part of the world. The final way that Jesus kept separate from the world was that he did not allow the world to influence him in any way. Now some may say, of course, he was perfect. And while that is true, that does not mean that he couldn't be tempted. In the past, Satan had successfully tempted one perfect person. So you can bet he would be willing to try again. But Jesus refused. Jesus resisted all the temptations that Satan threw at him. And when we see how he was able to do that, we can see how we can do the same when Satan tries to tempt us. Turn with me now to Luke chapter 4, and we'll look at verses 1 through 4 and see what temptation Jesus had to face. Again, Luke 4, 1 through 4. Then Jesus, full of Holy Spirit, turned away from the Jordan, and he was led about by the Spirit in the wilderness for 40 days, being tempted by the devil. And he ate nothing in those days. So when they had ended, he felt hungry. At this the devil said to him, "If you are a son of God, tell this stone to become a loaf of bread." But Jesus answered him, "It is written, man must not live on bread alone." Can you imagine how hungry Jesus must have been here? If you ever had to fast for some sort of medical procedure, you can relate on some level as to how Jesus may be feeling here. But at least in that environment, you're more than likely in some sort of medical facility or hospital, you're in AC. Here, Jesus was alone in the wilderness for 40 days and nights, being tempted by the devil, the ruler of this world. Satan tried to tempt Jesus to use his power to satisfy his desire for food, but Jesus refused. Jesus did not allow his desire to dominate him. But how was he able to do it? The key is in verse 4. Jesus answered him, "It is written." Because of the knowledge that Jesus had, he knew exactly what Jehovah expected of him. So he knew that Jehovah would not approve of him using his power in this way. That's how he was able to resist. So what about us? How can we resist Satan's temptations that he throws at us? Well, just like Jesus, we have to know what Jehovah expects of us. And because we're imperfect, the only way we can know that is by doing a study of the Bible. Studying the Bible will help us to learn everything of Jehovah's expectations. He's already told us what he expects of us. We just need to be willing to learn what those expectations are. But simply knowing what Jehovah's expectations are is not enough. Eve knew what Jehovah expected of her, but she still made the choice to give in to the temptation that Satan presented. So after we know what Jehovah expects of us, when we're then confronted with Satan's temptations, we have to make the same choice that Jesus did and reject those temptations immediately. When we do that, we can resist temptation, because by doing that, we're letting the Bible direct our thinking and our actions. When we do all these things, now we can imitate Jesus and remain no part of the world. But now, there's a question we need to ask, which is, how will the world respond? If we focus on seeking God's kingdom first, the world will just let us do our own thing, right? No. During the first century, after Jesus had died, many of his followers who made the choice to remain no part of the world were persecuted, hated, some were even killed. But what assurance did Jesus give them, and by extension, us today, who make the same choice to remain no part of the world? Turn with me now to John chapter 16, verse 33.